This Sun-Gazette video coverage is proudly sponsored by Woodlands Bank.
Hey, good afternoon. How you doing? It's Chris Masse. Hope you had a good Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and being in the festive season, I'm going to rant a little bit here. I've had some stuff brewing and wrote it down so I could stay on track here. But if you're like me, you probably watched the college football playoffs over the weekend, and the games were blowouts, but that's sports, that happens. But I mean, I think the main takeaway outside of the games was how Kirk Herbstreit and ESPN completely embarrassed themselves with their nonstop shilling and nonstop biased coverage of the SEC and their illogical, idiotic arguments. They cast a pall over what should have been one of the best weekends in college football sports history, and we'll go through it here, and we'll go through some of the illogical things that they said, and how easy their arguments are debunked. But we'll start. Kirk Herbstreit took a shot at Indiana for a 10-point loss, which was the closest one of the weekend, by the way, and shots at SMU for their blowout losses. Well, Indiana wasn't even a blowout. SMU did get blown out at Penn State. Conveniently, though, he left out Tennessee, who actually suffered the biggest blowout loss of the week when they got curb stomped by Ohio State. So why so quiet? Is it because ESPN has the TV rights to the SEC? Herbstreit's the leader of it, but it's all Sean McDonough, who I used to respect. He embarrassed himself during the Indiana game with his shilling for the SEC. But let's go back to that. Why so quiet on Tennessee? Oklahoma, who was 6-6, got routed by Tennessee, but Tennessee beat Alabama. Who beat Alabama? Oklahoma did. 24-3. It was an embarrassing loss for Alabama. So by their logic, how awful is Alabama since they lost to Tennessee, who got curb stomped, as I said, by Ohio State? This is how you play the game by their logic, but you can't throw it back in their face. Then it's crickets. Herbstreit's a walking embarrassment. This is a guy that used to have a lot of respect throughout college football circle worlds and throughout the college football circle, and the last 2 years he's destroyed all that. He then said after the Tennessee loss, which he conveniently glossed over, he said, quote, "I don't want to hear about wins." He actually said that, people. Stop laughing, it's true. He actually said it. So by Kirk Herbstreit's logic, teams in the playoffs, teams in the NFL, whatever sport, can just get in based on the quote-unquote eye test. So me being a 49ers fan, I'm in luck because they're 6-9 right now, but they passed the eye test. They were in the Super Bowl last year. They got talent all over the place. So by Kirk Herbstreit's logic, they should get into the playoffs. Conversely, the Vikings, who are 13-2, they don't pass the eye test. Sam Darnold was considered a bust before the year started. The Vikings were picked to finish in last in the NFC North. Sorry, you're 13-2. Kirk Herbstreit says wins don't matter. Get out, Minnesota. The Niners are taking your spot. They passed the eye test. See how stupid this is? So to follow that up, Kirk Herbstreit, who has never met a check he won't cash, has to be everywhere. So now he calls NFL games on Thursday night. You know why I don't watch NFL on Thursday nights? Because Kirk Herbstreit's involved with it. So anyway, he calls the Seahawks-Bears game. Well, the Bears lost, again, 6-3. They've lost 10 straight games. But if you follow Herbstreit's and all the ESPN acolytes, SEC shills logic, they play in a division that includes the 13-2 Lions, the 13-2 Vikings, and the 11-4 Packers. So based on their division strength, the Bears should be in the playoffs because their division's so strong. That's the idiotic arguments we hear about the SEC and teams that play in the SEC. So I'm just playing the game that Herbstreit and all the ESPN SEC acolytes are playing right now. So, and here's the thing. Their arguments don't make any sense at all. They keep saying, the shills like Herbstreit and Paul Feinbaum, who, he's an embarrassment. Anybody north of the Mason-Dixon line knows that he's a shill for the SEC. So at least we already knew that he was. It's Herbstreit and the other guys that are even more embarrassing themselves because Feinbaum embarrassed himself a long time ago. But they whine about schedule strength. Okay, here's Alabama's non-conference schedule. Mercer, Western Kentucky, South Florida, and Wisconsin, who was 5-7. What a murderer's row! Wow. Ole Miss, who's led by Lane Kiffin, who embarrassed himself. He embarrasses himself when he coaches, but furthermore on social media after they didn't get a playoff bid. Their non-conference schedule: Furman, Middle Tennessee, Georgia Southern. Brutal, man. Now I see what all these SEC idiots are saying about the schedule strength. We're not going to schedule any more tough games. You don't anyway. So their arguments are stupid. Because all their losses were in conference. That happens. Why are you dogging Indiana? They play in the Big Ten. That's a great conference. Yeah, they didn't have to play Oregon. They didn't have to play Penn State, but that's not their fault. That's just how the schedule fell this year. By the way, Indiana played Ohio State a lot tougher than Tennessee did. So there's another blow to your SEC argument. So Alabama, you lost to 6-6 Vanderbilt. You got curb stomped by 6-6 Oklahoma. Stop whining. You didn't earn your spot in the playoffs. Ole Miss, you lost to 4-8 Kentucky. You and all your SEC shills and Kirk Herbstreit and your corporate sellouts, stop whining. They blew it. They lost. They had their chances. They blew it. That's sports. You earn your way into the playoffs. You're not given anything. That's the problem with college. That's been the problem with college football for years. And here's the thing, Herbstreit and all the SEC shills at ESPN, this isn't the first. People are acting surprised that they're doing this now. They did it last year. Florida State went undefeated. They were 13-0. They won a major conference championship. They kept them out of the playoff. And Herbstreit was greasing the wheels. If people noticed, he was greasing the wheels weeks before because he knew Alabama had one loss and he knew they were going to the SEC championship to play Georgia. And that if they won that, all of a sudden you'd have 2 one-loss teams and 3 potential undefeated teams plus a Texas team that beat Alabama. So he started greasing the wheels, looking for excuses to keep Florida State out. And they found it when their quarterback got hurt late in the season. Ridiculous. Can you imagine an NFL team? Carson Wentz, he got hurt when the Eagles in 2017 were 12-1 at the time. Guess what? They still let the Eagles in the playoffs. Kirk Herbstreit wouldn't have. Spoiler alert, the Eagles went on to win the Super Bowl with backup quarterback Nick Foles that year. But Herbstreit started, I lost all respect for him at that point when he basically sold out a Florida State team that earned its way in by winning every single game on its schedule, and they threw for money for Alabama because because ESPN has the rights to the playoffs, because they have the rights to the SEC TV deal. They wanted the big brand. They wanted the big SEC brand in the playoffs. So forget about winning. That's their excuse. You know what? This year, Georgia, their quarterback's hurt. Carson Beck's hurt. He's probably not going to play. Why wasn't anybody advocating for them to forfeit their playoff spot? They can't win, right? They got a backup quarterback. That's what we heard about Florida State. It's embarrassing. And I keep hearing the shills of ESPN before they went silent with after Tennessee lost, but when Indiana, the non-brands, the non-money makers, in their opinion, Indiana, SMU, when those teams lost, we heard about, it's blowouts. The committee blew it. It happens. It's sports. The NFL, you know who had blowouts last year? The NFL. The wild card round of the playoffs last year, the margin was over 23 points, lower than this year's. I didn't hear anybody saying blow up the system. Nobody was blasting NFL. Why'd you let the Cleveland Browns in the playoffs? They earned it. It happens. If you grew up like I did in the 80s and into the 90s, almost every year the Super Bowl was a blowout. Nobody was saying blow that system up. Nobody was saying just have the Niners and Cowboys play. That's the real Super Bowl. It was, but nobody was saying blow up the system because it's stupid. You don't do it. It happens. It's sports. So, finally we have a great system. For years, college football has been so stupid for years. It was stupid when I grew up, and a lot of times number 1 and 2 didn't even play because they were committed to different bowl games. Their conferences were committed to bowl games. Then we got the BCS, and you got 1 versus 2, but there were so many worthy teams that had a case, and that didn't solve anything. And even with 4 teams, there were teams that could make arguments that they belong, that they could have won it all. Now we have a good system, a fair system, and all these idiots who have blatant conflicts of interest at ESPN want to blow it up because they didn't get their beloved SEC teams in there. It's embarrassing. It's a conflict of interest. And the problem is guys like Herb Street and everybody at ESPN, they're dangerous to the sport because they have influence, they do have influence on the committee. The committee listens to what they have. Money talks. Excuse me. Frothing at the mouth. I'm so animated about this, but they're a danger to the sport, and the conflict of interest. Something has to be done to stop these people. Like I said, they're trying to ruin what should be a great time for college football. It's not right. It's embarrassing. So don't let these morons fool you with their illogical, hypocritical comments. The playoffs are good as they are. They're just talking for money. They're corporate sellouts. They're shills. They have no shame. So I say to all those guys at ESPN and the women too, because Heather Dinich embarrassed herself last year. She was with Herb Street with the whole Alabama thing. All you shills at ESPN, grow up, stop being biased, and have some shame, for crying out loud. Hey, everyone, have a happy new year, except Kirk Herb Street.